Hi everyone, Diablo 4 Season 2 is starting very soon, and if you're still unsure what you should play, you might want to take a look at our updated tier lists here on Maxroll. So yesterday we just had our 5-hour meeting basically. We were sticking our heads together trying to figure out how the builds will perform per class and, cross-class in comparison. And we crafted full new leveling, endgame, and speed farming tier lists. And we also take another look at the unique tier list here, where we have moved a lot of stuff up and down, just to give them like an overall ranking of how useful each of those uniques are. So this is what I'm going to go over in this video. We also had some other tier lists here, like the Millennium Hearts. Obviously, that is gonna get removed. Also, the Nightmare Dungeon push tier list. For now, we have decided to retire this one because we are probably bringing something similar back in Season 3 when they introduce the new endgame system. That is going to be like post 100 stuff. So I guess for that, we're going to see something similar to that again. But for now, we're leaving this out because pushing does not really exist in the current state of the game. So I'm going to go through leveling, then the end game, and then the speed farming. So these are the build tier lists, and I'm also going to show the uniques real quick at the end. For the Nightmare Dungeons, you need to know that right now we do have the list of Nightmare Dungeons that are going to be in Season 2, but we cannot test them yet because they are changing them pretty massively, and there's no point to really try this yet. So we're going to try to get this out quite soon after launch, just to give a heads up on that. So for the leveling tier list, this is for 1 to 50 if you get started to the season. We have mainly looked at how easy is a build to level up to 50 basically without anything, without any RNG, without drops. And for example, we have criteria like movement speed, so ability, ease of play, damage output, and how fast you can reach level 50 so you can start endgame basically. So for that, we definitely have one clear winner, which is the Necromancer. Necromancer Blood Surge is like the fastest leveling build in the game, but there are others as well. There is Blight, Corpse Explosion, there is Sever. So Necro overall is looking pretty solid, and they also have a bunch of A tier builds here that we expect to perform pretty well in that category. Then other than that, we also have a bunch of Sorc stuff and Rogue here. So Twisting Blades, obviously it has not been nerfed or anything. That's still going to be really good. We expect Fireball, Chain Lightning Sorc to be pretty good because of Fireball Enchant, for example. That is really good in the early game. And a bunch of other Rogue builds here that are all performing relatively well. The classes that we don't think are going to be doing so well in general are the Barbs and the Druids. They don't really have really good early game power and usually rely on some really big aspects, especially the Druids. If you don't find the right aspect for your build, then they're just kind of slow to level up. And Barbs also then rely on, stacking up massive stats from their weapons later on, and so lots of like item and stat synergies. So they're probably not as good as the other classes here to level up. That being said though, getting to level 50 is just a start. It doesn't really take much more than a few hours anyway in most scenarios. If you just farm like, domain tunnels, for example, that seems to be the strat for the most part. But you can also do whispers. You can also maybe even do the PvP zone. So there are some options here. And you don't have to go with like the top tier builds just to get to 50 in a decent amount of time. So that's usually pretty easy stuff. Now comes probably the most important tier list, the end game builds tier list. So here we rank the builds by the overall end game capabilities. That means like leveling from 50 to 100 and basically doing all types of content. Nightmare Dungeons, Helltide, bosses, everything you can think of. It's like an overall ranking of a build. Obviously, this is very difficult to benchmark. So there's also a lot of like, personal experience and like a personal touch in this kind of ranking here. But we do try our best to kind of put the builds in order. And the way it's looking right now is Necromancer actually seems to have the strongest build in the game overall with Infamous Necro. So we put that here at the top. The main reason for that is it was already a pretty good build. And we also have a really insane new unique item here. This is the Cephal's Corroded Signet that is basically made for that build and is also probably the strongest newly introduced unique here. So it may look kind of weak if you look at this damage number, but this is like a level 1 value. And if you scale this up to like item power 900, this thing is going to do dozens of thousands of damage on a proc. And then this can be multiplied with other multipliers from like, crit, vuln, whatever. So we expect some pretty crazy numbers on Infamous. And this build is going to be basically nearly unkillable. It has insane AoE coverage and probably decimates everything basically. So this is why we have it as the top build. We expect this to go absolutely crazy. That being said though, I mean, all of the S tier builds are superb, and we also all the AE tier builds, honestly, like you can easily get to level 100 with like, you know, no trouble at all. You probably won't have any issues with those new bosses for the most part, as long as you know, properly build a character defensively with resists and all that. That is like important now in Season 2. But for the most part, there are a lot of really good builds on all of the classes. So if you look at this here, we have, yeah, Necro, Rogue, Druid up here. So in general, those classes are really strong, but also right here, we have a bunch of Barb builds. And then we also have some Sorc builds right here. And the thing about Sorc is actually really good very early in the game, mostly because of Fireball enchant, for example. They get a lot of power quite early. And then also very late in the game. So if you compare this, for example, to the speed farming tier list, where we talk about like really optimized level 100 setups, where, you know, you just blast through nightmare dungeons and stuff like that, Sorc actually really catches up. So if you're wondering, Sorc is not a bad class or anything. I think Sorc is really good, but they are just kind of like, they need a few steps to really get to that insane power level, basically, as you progress. And you might not have that like on the way leveling up, basically. So this is kind of why they're a bit lower here for the most part. And kind of similar with Barbs, you know, it's not like Barbs are going to be weak or anything. I expect Barbs to be really good. It's just that they are just not as fast. Are just like, you know, rushing through dungeons and everything like exploding by default, kind of like a pulverized druid or something. So it's kind of like the lack of mobility or the lack of AoE clear in some cases, but not that they are like weak or difficult to play. In fact, I actually believe that Barb is going to be the overall, let's say, easiest class. They're going to be very tanky, they have good damage output, kind of similar to Druids. Usually I praise Druids for exactly those points as well, to be like a kind of noob-friendly class, because they are just like sturdy. And, you know, something like a Rogue, for example, usually in the positioning and timing, and you have to like, you know, find the right setup basically for your attacks. And yeah, this is, you know, probably a bit better of a class or of a build here, for example, Death Trap, Twisting Blades. You know, those builds remain at the top basically, where they have been since the launch. And other builds are also near that on all of the classes. But as you can see, there's actually a pretty big variety here in different builds. We also have a new build that is coming to Maxroll, which is the Rain of Arrows guide. So this is one I'm writing right now. That's probably going to go live tomorrow or something, where I expect some pretty crazy stuff. So I'm going to make a video dedicated to this build myself as well. So stay tuned for that. I think it's going to be a really fun build. It's definitely the one I'm looking forward to the most this season. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, outside of that, we have been quite conservative in making new builds so far. So something that is coming probably at some point is the Upheaval Barb. We expect Upheaval Barb to be really strong now with the Hellhammer buffs and the Upheaval buffs and a bunch of other things that they made for Barb changes. In general, Barbs are looking pretty solid, so there's nothing really to worry about in my opinion. And we'll see if like something more comes out of those new unique items. They introduced quite some pretty interesting items here. For example, there's also like this Boulder Druid, so you might be looking for that. That can definitely become its own build, but right now we weren't really so sure if this is really just a meme or not. So we'll wait and see. But if it turns out to be somewhat decent, then we're probably going to have a guide for that at one point as well. And there's definitely a lot of other potential here for something like Scoundrel Ladders builds or, you know, Blue Rose. There's a lot of opportunities here. Also with Flicker Step potentially being like a really insane, like unique cooldown, ultimate cooldown reduction tool. So we'll see if something comes out of that. But yeah, for the most part, we are updating our guides, and this is the new ranking that we think will represent what's going on in Season 2. Of course, we're going to go back to, you know, min-max this and fine-tune things and move up or down certain things. The whole game has changed, so we can't really say everything for certain here. And then we have the Speedfarm Tierlist. So this is when you are level 100, when you are decked out, and you just want to blast basically, and you want to keep going and grind up your perfect loot, grind those tier 100 dungeons or something like that. So this is the tier list to look at. And yeah, for fully optimized endgame stuff, we definitely expect like 3 classes to perform really well here. So this is the Druid, first and foremost. They have a bunch of really strong builds. Despite the Grizzly Rage nerf, we think that the Druid is going to remain at the top for basically all of these activities here at the end, once you are you know, once you have your Tempest Roar, once you have your setup, then I think, yeah, there's a bunch of builds here. We have Pulverize, Lightning Storm, Lightning Shred, and Werewolf Tornado. Apparently, the Shred bug is still in the game with Blurred Beast, so that will also completely trivialize, like even Uber Lilith, if you're willing to use that. Volvark build is gone, that is dead, so that is probably not coming back, I think. So they have removed this bug with the HP scaling of the monsters, so I don't think that there's any hope there. And we have a bunch of Rogue builds here, so Rogue in general is just looking really powerful now. They have not really touched the Rogue very much since launch, actually, just a few tweaks here and there, a bunch of buffs to kind of underused things. And, well, everything else that was at the top was kind of like slowly brought down, and Rogue has a bunch of really good builds now here at the top. And there's also a lot of Sorc stuff that I explained earlier. So Sorcs, in particular, at level 100, when you have, you know, perfect cooldown values, once you have your resource generation rolls, these kind of things, and the full Paragon setup, then Sorcs usually start blasting really hard because they're just really mobile with their teleports. So either you have short teleport cooldown, or you have teleport and a teleport evade enchantment, so you can really just fly through the maps. And this is why Sorc like catches up so much here at the end. And this applies to various builds. Like many of these can just introduce the teleport enchant, and then you still have a second enchant. And for example, now also vulnerable application is not so important anymore. You don't need to have a Frost Nova ready at all times. You don't need to trigger Frozen Orbs for vulnerable and these kind of things. So that also helps the Sorcs here a little bit, I think. And then again, yeah, kind of like most of the top endgame builds also perform somewhere up here in A tier, etc. So we have more builds down here in like the B and C tier. So if you're curious about, you know, some of those builds that are not like top tier, like S or A, then they're still playable. Like most of the stuff that we have here is, you know, not necessarily bad. We're just trying to like, you know, extend the tier list throughout all of the tiers for the most part, to make sure that we kind of like give like a bit of a direction to, you know, how they stack up against each other. But for example, if you look at the endgame build tier list and you see something like a Sever Necro, I've actually played that in Season 1, and that was a fairly solid build. You know, I had no issues with that. Same with Frozen Orb Sorc, I also played that in Season 1, and that was fine. And they also buffed Frozen Orb a little bit, for example. But, you know, it doesn't really hold up to like those top tier builds, but it's not like you're gonna have a lot of issues going through the game if you want to play one of these lower tier builds, if you really like them. I do that all the time, and they still work just fine. They might just be a bit slower getting to level 100, or they might have longer boss fights and these kind of things. So this is why they're down here. And the same applies to the speed farming tier list. The same applies to the leveling tier list. And the good thing is that for most of these builds, we also do have guides on Maxroll already. So some of them are still missing. See here, some of them are grayed out because we just didn't really have time to make them yet. Or some of them are also kind of new. For example, I mentioned the Rain of Arrows Rogue, so that's coming soon. But we are obviously trying to fill in all of the gaps here over time. But most of these builds, you can just click them, you can open them, and then you have the guide. But again, as I mentioned earlier, you should check if they're already updated. So our plan is to get every single build that you see here updated to Season 2, including vampiric powers, including the crit and vuln and resist reworks and the Paragon stuff, and, you know, everything that's there. We're gonna have updated setups for you for all of these builds. So stay tuned for those. We're also gonna have a news post about this, so, you know, you can check the homepage, you can check the Maxroll Discord. We're gonna announce when we're done, basically. So expect that, I suppose, sometime either today or tomorrow, so on like pre-launch at least. So we want to get everything out before the season starts. And then as we go, we're gonna make some other you know, tweaks or some other tier lists, for example the Nightmare Dungeon tier list that I mentioned. And just to go over this real quick, I'm not gonna go through every single item here on the unique tier list. However, a lot of stuff has kind of moved because they buffed a lot of uniques here, and this is just a ranking to give you a bit of an idea that like how certain uniques just perform in general, like how popular are they. For example, if you find, you know, like a Fist of Fate and you're wondering, should I really keep that? Then, well, you can check here. It's a bit like the Savage List tool that we had in Diablo 3, but we can't really exactly translate that tool to Diablo 4 because of how different the games work and how you can make different setups with different choices work. So it's not so great, like black and white basically, but it's more like a gray area where, okay, this unique may be good for some builds, it may be acceptable, it may be kind of trash. So that is what you're trying to rank here. And you can see here as our criteria. So basically really strong uniques or builds that are good on like really powerful builds or on many different builds. They are kind of like up here on S and A. And then if there's some uniques that are like some like pretty decent or like mandatory for like some kind of like lower tier builds or niche builds, then they're like down here in B or C. And then those that are like basically never used or just very, very special cases, then they're down here. So this kind of gives you a bit of an idea of what you want to keep around in your stash in case you have to salvage stuff. And, you know, you can't just keep everything around, I guess. Especially now when people start farming those bosses and you're going to start finding a lot of uniques, potentially from other classes as well, then this might help you out. And that's it for this video here. So I hope this helps you to make a decision. Stay tuned for a lot more videos from me. I have a bunch of build guides coming up with updated stuff, especially for rogues. And yeah, a bunch of other videos of updates and what I'm going to do in Season 2, etc. So hope you liked this video. Check out the links here for the tier list. I have them linked in the description, so you can also read them up there. And I wish you good luck in Season 2. See you guys next time.